Our next presenter I'd like to introduce is Brent Thye. He is a practicing perfusionist with Pacific Lifelines. He does have a history as a flight paramedic, a park ranger, a helicopter pilot, and an Eagle Scout. And he's going to talk to us today about a very hot topic, the state of pay, perfusion trends.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, welcome to my talk. I'm Brent Thye, and today we will be looking at the state of pay perfusion trends. First, disclosures. I have none. You know what they say, always start every presentation with a thought-provoking quote. So, what's our plan of attack? I'm going to start with an introduction, move on to some metadata. Next, we'll look at how things look nationally, then break it down by region. Then we're going to compare by housing cost, and then we're going to put a bow on it. So, let's get uncomfortable together. Talking about money is awkward and uncomfortable, but an open and honest discussion is a step towards pay equity. What you can expect here is no shame or judgment from me. This is historical data, so it can help inform the future, but not predict it. Facts served cold. What you won't get from me. No opinion, because I suspect there's plenty of strong ones in the room already. No institution or individual names. The data will be de-identified. No granular data, meaning we aren't here to dissect individuals' pay, but rather look at big picture overviews and see the larger forces at play. Metadata, the joy of looking at data about data. Think of this like a treasure map. It doesn't tell you what the treasure is, but instead tells you how to find that treasure. What we're going to be analyzing is data up to 20 years deep, compiled from 42 different employers. Cumulatively, it covers 688 individual perfusionists, generating some 2,881 full-time data points, which we'll be analyzing. All the data is publicly available, meaning if I found it, so can you, without any special access required. So, in this chart, each facility is a different color band, with wider bands indicating more full-time perfusionists in a given facility, and narrower bands fewer. That escalated pretty quickly. But what about part-time people? Here are all the part-timers lumped together in one invisible band on top. So here are the total numbers for each year. Again, the colorful area represents full year, full-time perfusionists, and the dotted line on top, that's the total number, including the part-timers. So now each white bar on bottom represents a single facility, regardless of department size, with the total number in each year. So here's the final look at our metadata. The data we will be analyzing for the rest of our time together are the colorful 2,881 full-time data points. To summarize it, it's a diverse data set from institutions of all different sizes. The highest fidelity data, encompassing over 250 perfusionists per year, is from 2018 to present, so that will be a particular focus. All data presented from here on out will only include that of full-time perfusionists, so we can make fair comparisons. So, let's start with a broad national overview and some snappy numbers. But first, we need a common vocabulary. Base pay. This is a range usually based on experience. When you see a job posted with a pay range, this is most often what is shown. But for each person, you get an actual base pay to what each individual earns. If they don't receive any additional pay, then this would be their total pay. Turns out that is rarely the case. Some earn overtime pay. Some receive call pay. And the other pay category covers any other pay such as bonus, retention awards, etc., but doesn't have a specific attribution. Add them all together and you get the total pay. Some employers, however, only provided total pay data, which includes all the categories, but without providing a breakdown. So, for 2022, across 275 full-time perfusionists, the average total pay is $202,691. 7% is the average pay increase received by perfusionists employed full-time in both 2021 and 2022 at the same institution. 20.1% above base pay is what the average person received based on employers that broke down earnings data. 109 to 390,000 is the range that everyone fell into. So let's look at it visually. Here's the distribution with $20,000 wide pay bands, including the number and percentage in each band. Now, with some actual pay statistics, we have a little more defined parameters. So remember that classic bell curve from Stats 101? The actual and theoretical pay curves here are roughly similar bell shapes, except that our actual pay outliers are all on the high side, where I think everyone would prefer they be. So let's sum this up. The data is informative but incredibly broad, making direct comparisons almost impossible. The lion's share earned from 140 to 260,000. This is only data from 2022, but I promised you a deeper look. So breaking up along regional lines seems like a natural next step. We will separate the data into 4 different regions: West, Midwest, Northeast, and South regions, as defined by the Census Bureau. This is what they look like. While it's not perfect, it is what the Census Bureau chose, so we're stuck with it. Since I live in California, let's start our journey out west. With 80 million people, it's 24% of the population. 7 employers provided data. We'll dive deep into one of those. Those 7 facilities include 60 full-timers, which is 22% of the data are collected, so it's fairly representative. We're going to build this first graph together slowly. This data is from a single West employer, and we're looking at 11 years worth of data. We can see the range spans from $75,000 to $400,000, quite a range. Here, we can see each individual perfusionist dashed base pay, which is a fairly linear progression as we would expect. But we put in the solid line, the total pay data, it shows a very different story of nonlinearity. Now, let's look at a few pertinent figures. We can see our absolute maximum, the 2022 minimum, and the 2022 maximum total pay. Let's go ahead and throw an average of base pay and total pay here. But remember, we aren't really here to dissect individuals' pay. So how do we get from base pay to total pay? Well, obviously, we start with the base. This particular facility pays overtime, and the rest is simply other, meaning that no pay category for that was specified. Let's look at how much average total pay changed year to year. This shows that on average, everyone's pay increased every year except 2022. When we compare with Western region inflation, we can see that they met or exceeded inflation every year until they fell just under in 2021 and way under in 2022. But take note that the base pay never actually fell, only the total pay went down. So using 2018 as a baseline, indexing to inflation shows the dashed base pay line on bottom is on par with what their actual base pay was. However, it's that total pay line on top that shows their average total actual pay fell under inflation by about $27,000, mostly due to reduced overtime earnings. That's the green part on the graph in 2022. So that's the process for a single employer. Let's go ahead and put all 7 West region employers' average total pay together, and let's include their average yearly percent change too, color coordinated, of course. And you can see quite a bit of variance between the different employers. So if we average every perfusionist in the West region, we see in 2022, the average total earnings are about $210,000. And with average percent change, we note that it was above inflation every year except 2022. And when we index to inflation since 2018, that shows that the average total earnings exceeded inflation by about $3,000. Moving on to the Midwest, with 12 states, almost 70 million people, 21% of the population here, 6 facilities included. We're going to dive deep into one, looking at 21 years of data. Then we're going to put it all together and look at all 6. Those 6 facilities include 43 full-timers, which is 16% of the total, a little underrepresented here. Let's reach deep in the past and look at raw data from one employer. From 2002 to 2010, this employer had very little turnover and a lot of pay above base salary. Peel back the onion a little bit here, you can see that the averages climb faster than base pay by quite a bit. But then the next 5 years, we see increased turnover and the average pay dipping, followed by a sharp rise in base pay and total pay. Not bad. Oh, okay. Followed by 5 years of even greater turnover. The sharp up and down segments here when someone joins or leaves the organization. Then, in the most recent 3 years, turnover really modulates. Extra pay is eliminated. And for those that have been in the business here for over 20 years, does anything about this feel familiar? Quick technical note. Those start and end years when the individuals earn less than a full year salary, they would have had a dramatic effect on the averages if they were included. That would be the line as shown in blue. But they are excluded from all statistics and analysis. So we are only comparing full-time, full-year data, apples to apples. Now, let's zoom out to all 6 Midwest employers' average total pay as well as their yearly percent change. Averaging all 43 of those Midwestern perfusionists together, we see that their 2022 average pay was, again, about $210,000. Comparing the pay change with inflation, we can see that they consistently exceeded inflation. Benchmarking to inflation only since 2018 shows that they beat inflation by nearly $23,000. Good job, Midwest. Next is the Northeast. 9 states holding 57 million people, it's 17% of the population, 6 facilities included. We're going to just look at the major trends here. 31 full-timers, which is only 11% of the total, so somewhat underrepresented again. Same dance as before. All 6 Northeast employers' total average pay, pretty tightly grouped with a couple outliers, but a lot of big swings on that lower percent change section. So again, if we average every perfusionist in the Northeast region together, we see in 2022, average total earnings were $244,000. With the average percent change, we can see that it roughly matched inflation, had a solid winning streak from 2016 to 2019. And again, 2018 inflation index shows us that on average, total pay for all Northeast perfusionists beat inflation by a little over $12,000. Finally, we're headed down south, 17 states and DC holding a whopping 129 million people, 39% of the population, 20 facilities included. They provided data for 141 full-timers, a huge 51% of the total. Did we save the best for last year? So here's all 20 South employers' average total pay. A little bit of a mess, but note that they actually start pretty tightly grouped until 2017. They start diverging a little bit, but then they're pretty scattered by 2022. The percent change on bottom, it's just a totals rat nest. It's all over the place. Interestingly, we can see that when we average all 141 full-time individuals, it comes out to a shockingly linear progression that ends up around $188,000. And the percent change hews relatively close to inflation there. Again, indexing to inflation only since 2018 shows CCPs in the South beat inflation by nearly $6,000. That's not nothing. Now, let's put them all together on one graph and see who wins. You can see that there's going to be a little jockeying going on, but it's fairly consistent trends with some variation. But by 2022, Northeast comes out ahead by far, followed by West, Midwest, and finally the South, lagging over $56,000 behind. As before, there aren't any really common trends in the percent change data on bottom. Averaging all full-timers nationally yields that 2022 average pay of $202,000 we discussed before. The yearly percent change of national average beats inflation by a good margin until 2022 when it dips just under, except the Midwest, who clobbered inflation in 2022. And one last time here, we're going to index it to inflation for the national average pay. And we can see that national average beats it to the tune of about $8,000. So this gives us our final and fullest picture of the regional differences. So let's finish this section up. Northeast comes out on top. South trails by over 56,000. For the most part, everyone beat inflation most years, except in 2022, when Midwest clobbered it, but everyone else lagged. Averages may also be oversimplifying it, because remember, for every average, there are outliers. Time to put Humpty Dumpty back together and break them apart by housing cost. The method. 1. Locate the map on the hospital. That's an easy one. 2. Draw a 20-mile radius circle, approximating a 30-minute call radius. Fairly simple. 3. Find all the homes that sold recently in that circle. Okay, a little challenging. 4th, arrange by price. That's easy enough. 5, find the price of the house at the 66th percentile. So far, so good. Repeat 274 more times. And then 7, sort into 4 roughly equally populated quartiles. You end up with this. You get low cost of housing, so their 66th percentile home costs less than $430,000. Then you move up to moderate from $430,000 to $500,000. High cost, $500,000 to $650,000. And very high cost. That same 66th percentile house in these areas cost over $650,000. How hard was all that? Let's play a quick game. These are all houses at the 66th percentile of their respective area. But which is which? They all look fairly similar, but at very different price points. How about house 1, 3-car garage? What do we think that's worth? High, high, very high, low, low, medium, low, low. What do we think? That's a moderate cost house at $450,000. How about house 2? Looking very tidy indeed. What do we think? Low, low, high, very high, low, medium, high. Oh, it's coming in low. $215,000 for this one. All right. How about house 3? Look at that lush foliage. You got a 50-50 chance here. It's coming in at $630,000. That's going to be high. Not much guess on that last one. And then there is there. This is just to give you an idea that just because they're different costs of housing areas doesn't mean that the cheap ones look cheap or the expensive one looks expensive. Now, let's put some meat on the bone. So here we can see the trends for each quartile. They start off spaced approximately as one would expect. But by 2016, as you can see here, that low category really catches up to the moderate and high. They remain grouped till 2022, and even the very high group really starts to come down and actually drops by about $4,000. So on average, there's actually very little difference in terms of total pay between low, moderate, and high cost of housing areas. And in 2022, that premium for living in a very high cost area almost completely evaporates. Does this concern anyone else? The percent change, it's not particularly helpful on its own. So we can throw that national average in, put a little more nuance here. But honestly, I feel like the bigger story here is the percent change in the CPI inflation index, which shows that everyone beat inflation to some degree every year until 2022, when only the high cost category topped inflation. One last time, that 2018 inflation index to the national average here shows that everyone did manage to exceed inflation, though to very different degrees. Conclusions. Time for some final thoughts. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The good. Data, it's high fidelity since 2018, covering at least 250 full-timers. In 2022, that represents 8.6% of all certified perfusionists from 42 different facilities here. Nationally, average total pay is nearly $203,000, and it climbs 7% on average. However, that is under the inflation rate of 8% for that same period. The average perfusionist earned above or 20% above their base pay. Regionally, Northeast is the highest paying but smallest sample size. South is the lowest paying and largest sample size. Cost of housing, everyone beat inflation until 2022. The bad. I'm missing over 91% of all certified perfusionists. More data points will always draw a sharper picture. Nationally, it's a convenient talking point, but is it really applicable? There's very little nuance here with an extremely wide range. Regionally, the regions are still very large and diverse in terms of cost. Most underperformed inflation in 2022. Cost of housing. Probably the most concerning finding is that there's a decrease in correlation between a higher housing cost and the attendant higher pay that it requires to maintain. The ugly. Data. I will not say which employers are or are not included in this. There's no accounting for years of experience. The analysis focuses on averages, not individuals, so your own experience will vary. Nationally, we're making some big assumptions from a relatively small sample. Also, around 8% of all perfusionists are still paid less than $140,000 per year. Regionally, facility to facility, the percent changes all over the place, little to no uniformity or identifiable patterns. Additionally, I have no way of accounting for busyness, i.e. who's working 60 hours a week and who's done by lunch every day. Housing. It's a personal choice, not simply a numbers game, so your mileage is going to vary quite a bit on this one. Also, this analysis completely excludes rental housing, which is a large and important part of the housing market. The beyond? This presentation is an outgrowth of a series I've published in AMSEC today, starting with pay transparency, something which perfusion generally lacks when it's not required by law. If you want either copy of either of these articles, let me know. But why bother? What's next? And does it matter? I have a few more topics in mind for the next parts of my series, but honestly, with research, copywriting, editing, and review staff of me, and a budget of 0, it's kind of a heavy lift. It's not the most exciting work in the world. But does it matter? Yes, money matters. No matter how much some people pretend it doesn't or say it shouldn't, it does matter. But so far, presenting this topic has only gotten me paid with scorn. So here's a couple of the references I use. Very helpful indeed, I know. Oh, more references, still helpful. And that's what I've got. So I'd like to hear everyone's takes, their takeaway, what you think. So I'll open it up. The spicier comments, the better.
Thanks, Brent. Any questions for Brent?
Oh, I forgot. If you have a question, you have to stand up, say your name, where you're from, and how much you made last year. That'll keep all the comments away.
During the data, do you also incorporate things like the perks of, say, retirement, things like that, pensions, or is that just base pay, the overtime, stuff like that?
So this data only includes basically what you would see on your W-2 and then as well as the breakdown from there. If you look at my paper, there is a section about that, but employers, they value benefits very differently from one employer to the next of how much it costs, how much they say it's worth, and all that. So that's a very difficult subject to actually tackle.
And do you think that prices will continue, or salaries, due to the cost of perfusion schools?
That's a fine question, sir.
First of all, thanks. That's a lot of data, and it's interesting. Second of all, please continue this, because I'd like to see it in a couple years when we come off the COVID high, where we all got a ton of overtime. If you work somewhere with ECMO, you got a ton of overtime, and it made our paychecks look great. I'm not complaining, but they're not going to stay that way, I think. So I'd like to see the data going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I tried to get a little bit before and after both the pandemic and the inflation going on. So that's why I said the most recent years from 20 to 2022, there are so many other factors involved, extrinsic of perfusion, that influence this, that it's difficult to capture.
Real quick, are you planning to expand upon this and actually compare international salaries as well?
That's a difficult one, because again, this was all based on public records, and when you start going internationally, to obtain that data in a reliable manner is very difficult. Because I will say that one difference is I did not ask any individuals how much they earned in this. I simply submitted requests and managed to find all the information I needed that way to try and remove that bias. But unfortunately, like I said, the international market is very different.
I was going to say, if you want to include the UK, you need a logarithmic scale. One of the questions online was there any groups that you saw that were unionized, and did that make a difference?
Again, I don't have any way of sussing that out specifically because this data does not include that information.
All right, great. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. This concludes this session. We'll take a break and return at 11. Thank you.
Thank you.